Hello, hello, hello. Nice to see you too. Welcome, everybody. I just want to say, if you ever try to speak with fake teeth, it doesn't work. So, it's good for the effect of Dracula, but it's not very good when you have to read a book. So, welcome everybody. Use these for effect with your students, but please, by all means, don't try to read a book with fake teeth. It will hurt and be very uncomfortable. Welcome. So nice to have all of you with us here again today. Yes, when we tell stories, we need to get into the mood. We have to dress up a little bit. We have to play a little bit of music, get our students a little bit engaged at the beginning of the event. All right. I see some of the comments. It's a pleasure to see you here with me today. We're going to continue the story of Dracula for this Halloween festival every Friday with our Friday reads. So, without further ado, let's jump into the story of Dracula. Let's remember now that our dear Jonathan was stuck in the castle of Count Dracula. And at the very end, I read, "I am all alone in the castle, but not for long. Tonight, I will climb down the castle wall and attempt to escape. I pray that I will survive." And here's Jonathan watching the gypsies take all the boxes away. And in one of those boxes was Dracula. Where was he going? We will find out right now. Okay. Letter from Mina Murray, to her friend Lucy. Now let's not forget, who is Mina? Mina is Jonathan's fiancée. She writes, "My dearest Lucy, I'm sorry I haven't written in such a long time. My job as an assistant school teacher is keeping me very busy. And I'm also learning how to type so that I can help Jonathan with his work when we get married. I have just received a letter from Jonathan. He says that he is well, he is okay, and that he will be back in about a month. I miss him terribly, and I cannot wait to hear about his adventures. Will you be spending the summer at Whitby? I really want to come and visit you. It would be wonderful to see you again. Your loving, Mina." Now, Lucy writes back to Mina and says, "Thank you for your letter. It was so good to hear from you. Yes, the rumors are true. My beloved Arthur has finally proposed. Oh, Mina, I am madly in love with him and I am so very happy. I don't know what I've done to deserve this. Mother and I will be spending the summer in Whitby, and we would love if you can come and stay with us." And now we're going to listen. So this was a letter between Mina and her friend Lucy. Now we're going to listen to Mina's journal. Okay. July 24th. Lucy picked me up at the station, and I must say, she's looking sweeter and lovelier than ever. I'm staying at her family's summer home. The home overlooks a lush green valley and is situated opposite a lovely old church. Lucy, her mother, and I had lunch at around 2 p.m., and then Lucy and I went for a walk. I am happy to be here, but I can't stop thinking about my Jonathan. I haven't heard from him in over 2 months, and I am very worried that something awful may have happened to him. I still feel very anxious about Jonathan. The 26th of July. It's not like him not to write, And now I'm worried about Lucy too. Her health is okay, but she started sleepwalking again. She used to sleepwalk as a child, but she hasn't done it in years. Her mother is very concerned about her and has asked me to make sure that Lucy's bedroom door is always closed at night. Lucy's fiancé, remember his name? Arthur, will be here in a few weeks, and he is looking after his sick father at the moment. Lucy is busy making arrangements for her wedding. August 8th. Still no news from Jonathan. If only he'd write just one line to let me know that he's okay. There is a terrible storm, and last night it rained. It rained so heavily, and the wind howled like a wounded animal. Lucy was restless all night, and I couldn't sleep either. We both got up early this morning and went for a walk to the harbor. On the way, we bumped into old Mr. Swales, who told us that a strange ship, now pay attention guys, a strange ship had been washed up on shore. The ship is called the Demeter, and it came all the way from Varna in Russia. Mr. Swales said that the Coast Guard investigated the ship and found no sign of life except for a large black dog. The entire crew was missing. Then the Coast Guard discovered the captain's dead body tied to the wheel. He was holding a cross in his hand. Now, do you remember what we said about the cross? There was an article in the newspaper about the ship, and it said that the Demeter had been carrying 50 boxes filled with soil when it ran aground. The boxes were collected by a solicitor in Whitby. The article also mentioned that the dog had disappeared. I'm concerned about Lucy. She is such a sensitive girl, and I fear that this terrible story will give her nightmares at night. So who do you think was on that ship in one of those boxes? Who do you think? My dear friends, as I read, I check out the comments. It's an absolute pleasure seeing your comments. I miss all of you very, very much, and I hope at some point in the future to come and visit you all again soon. Mina Murray's journal, the 11th of August. I woke up at 1 a.m. with a very bad feeling. I went to Lucy's room to check on her, but she wasn't there. I searched the entire house, but Lucy was nowhere to be found. I assumed that she was sleepwalking and that she had gone outside. So I grabbed a thick shawl and I went out to look for her. When I stepped out onto the front porch, I saw Lucy lying on a bench in the churchyard. I also saw a dark figure bending over her. I ran towards the churchyard, calling Lucy's name, "Lucy! Lucy!" And as I did, the figure turned to look at me. It was a man with a white face and red eyes. No, mine are hazel. And as I approached the bench, the man disappeared. I found Lucy lying on the bench with her eyes closed. She was still asleep, but breathing heavily. It was bitterly cold, and I flung the shawl around Lucy's shoulders and fastened it with a safety pin. She touched her throat and moaned as if in pain, and I decided it would probably be best to wake her. She moaned a few more times and then opened her eyes. She was trembling, and she held on to me. As she stood up, Then I helped her walk back home. I tucked Lucy into bed, and she made me promise not to tell anyone about her sleepwalking adventure, especially not her mother, who is so frail. I promised, of course, but I noticed 2 tiny red marks on her neck. I assumed that I must have pricked her with the safety pin, and I apologized. I locked Lucy's bedroom door and tied the key to my wrist. She slept soundly that night. The 14th of August. Let's see what happens next. The tiny wounds on Lucy's neck have not yet healed. In fact, they look worse than before. If they don't heal soon, I'm going to call the doctor. The 19th of August. Joy, joy, joy. Yes, yes, Jonathan is alive. I received a letter today from a nurse at a hospital in Budapest. She said that Jonathan has been suffering from a brain fever and has been under their care for 6 weeks. The nurse added that Jonathan had shown up at the hospital in a terrible state, ranting about demons and blood and ghosts. Poor Jonathan. I'm leaving Whitby immediately, and I should be in Budapest in just a few days. The 24th of August. Now she is in Budapest. I hardly recognized Jonathan. When I arrived this morning, he looked so thin, so pale. The doctor said that he had had some sort of terrible shock. He slept on and off for most of the day, and when he woke up, he asked me to give him his coat. He then took out a notebook and handed it to me. Mina, he said, I cannot clearly recall my experiences in Transylvania. I may have dreamt all of it, and I may be mad. The secret of what happened to me is in this journal, and I do not want to know. I want to put the past behind me. I want to get married and start our life together as soon as possible. Take the journal, read it if you want to, but please don't ever tell me what is in it. I took the book from Jonathan and I promised him that I would only read it if I really had to. Then I asked the nurse to send a priest to Jonathan's room. We were married this afternoon, and I have never felt as happy as I do now. I'm going to write Lucy a letter to tell her the good news. I miss her terribly. Now remember, Jonathan left the castle. Okay, jumped out the window and escaped from the castle, while Dracula was in the box on the ship and arrived. And let's see what happens next. Mina wrote a letter to Lucy, and Lucy writes back saying, My dearest Mina, congratulations to both of you. I hope you return to England soon. I cannot wait to see you. My wedding is scheduled to take place on the 28th of September. I have so much to do, but I've been feeling so weak and tired lately. I'm having trouble sleeping, and I often have bad dreams. Sometimes at night, I can hear strange flapping and scratching outside my window. Arthur is very worried about me, and he asked his friend, Dr. John Seward, to come and see me. Dr. Seward runs a lunatic asylum in London, and Arthur says he's an excellent doctor. The doctor gave me a thorough examination yesterday, but could not find any reason for my illness. He said that he is going to write to his former professor, Abraham Van Helsing. Now, if you've seen the movie Van Helsing, you know exactly what's going to happen. And asked him to come and see me. Professor Van Helsing lives in Amsterdam and is an expert in unusual diseases. I do hope he'll be able to help me. Dr. Seward's journal, the 7th of September. Our dear Lucy has been moved to Helsing. When Van Helsing and I arrived at Lucy's house this morning, I was shocked to see how much she had deteriorated since I last saw her. Her face was as pale as chalk, and she was struggling to breathe. Once Van Helsing had finished his examination, he asked to speak to me in private. She's in a very bad state, he said. She needs a blood transfusion immediately or else she will die. Arthur had just arrived and he overheard us talking. Van Helsing explained the situation to him and he volunteered to donate his blood. I'm pleased to report that Lucy looked much healthier after the transfusion. Her cheeks were rosy and she fell into a deep sleep. Arthur was sent home to recover, and Van Helsing and I stayed with Lucy to monitor her condition. She had a blood transfusion and felt better. As Van Helsing adjusted Lucy's pillow, the black velvet band around her neck moved out of position. Van Helsing saw the 2 red marks on her neck and gasped. "What are those marks, Professor?" I asked. Van Helsing shook his head. "I'm not sure," he replied. He was thoughtful for a few minutes. Then he said, "I must go back to Amsterdam to do some more research. Stay with her and don't let her out of your sight." So let's take a look. There's poor Lucy with Dr. Seward and Van Helsing. September 9th. I was absolutely exhausted. So I slept on the sofa for a few hours. I woke up when the professor arrived and we went up to Lucy's room together. When the professor opened the curtain, he gasped in horror. Lucy had taken a turn for the worse. Her face again was pale and her gums had shrunk back from her teeth. Van Helsing listened to her heart, and then he said, "It's not too late. Her heart is still beating, but she will need another blood transfusion immediately." I volunteered to donate my blood, and within a couple of hours, Lucy began to look like herself again. The professor told me to go home and rest, which I did. I still don't understand how Lucy lost so much blood so fast. Where did it all go? What do you guys think? Where did all of her blood go? This just doesn't make sense. The 10th of September. When I arrived at Helsing this afternoon, I found Van Helsing scattering garlic flowers around Lucy's room. He then placed a wreath of flowers around Lucy's neck and made her promise never to take it off. I jokingly commented that it looked as if he was trying to ward off an evil spirit, and he turned to me and said, Perhaps I am. I must admit, I found his response quite puzzling. The 12th of September. When Van Helsing and I returned to Lucy's house today, Mrs. Westenra informed us that Lucy was doing much better. Good, said Van Helsing. My treatment must be working. Yes, said Mrs. Westenra. But I simply had to take all of those dreadful garlic flowers away and open all the windows. The room was terribly stuffy. What did she do? The professor's face turned white. No! He cried. We raced up the stairs to Lucy's room and found her looking pale and lifeless. It was clear that she was in need of yet another blood transfusion. This time, I performed the transfusion and Van Helsing donated his blood. So this is the third gentleman who donated blood for Lucy. Van Helsing then told Mrs. Westenra that the garlic flowers had medicinal value and that she was to leave them in Lucy's room. He volunteered to stay with Lucy for the next few days and told me to return to the asylum. The 18th of September. Van Helsing sent me a telegram asking me to meet him at Lucy's home this morning. He mentioned in the telegram that he hadn't seen Lucy in 2 days, but that her mother had assured him the day before that she was doing well. When we arrived, we knocked on the front door, but there was no answer. We knocked again, and still no one responded. I felt a growing sense of panic, and Van Helsing suggested that we break open a window. Once inside the house, we rushed up the stairs to Lucy's room and found the girl and her mother lying on the bed. Lucy was unconscious, and Mrs. Westenra was dead. While the professor attempted to revive Lucy, I moved her mother's body to the sofa. She needs another transfusion, or she will surely die this time, said Van Helsing. Let me do it. You are too weak from the last time. I rolled up my sleeve and I was ready. The 20th of September, Dr. Seward's journal. Arthur has been away taking care of his sick father. So we sent him a telegram informing him of Lucy's condition, urging him to come see her as soon as possible. He arrived early this morning and was quite distraught when he saw his beloved Lucy. She barely resembled the woman that he had fallen in love with. Her face was ashen. Her cheekbones were poking through her skin. Lucy slept most of the day and hardly ate a thing. It appeared that she had lost her will to live. That's a tongue twister. Earlier this evening, Van Helsing examined Lucy again. She is dying, he said. It will not be long now. Van Helsing told Arthur that it was time to say goodbye to his fiancée. Arthur took Lucy's hand in his and knelt beside her. He told her how much he loved her, kissed her on her forehead. Arthur, she whispered. Then Lucy closed her eyes for the last time. Arthur covered his face with his hands and began to cry. I took him to the drawing room and stayed with him for a while. Then I went back to Lucy's room and found Van Helsing sitting at Lucy's bedside, lost in thought. Poor girl, I said. She is finally at peace. It is the end. Van Helsing turned to me and said, "No, my friend, this is only the beginning." I asked him what he meant, and he answered, "Just wait and see." The funeral will take place tomorrow, and Lucy and her mother will be buried together. September 21st. It is all over. Arthur has returned home. Van Helsing made preparations to go back to Amsterdam. He asked Arthur to give him Lucy's diary and letters in the hope that they will shed some light on her strange, unusual illness. Arthur sent a telegram to Lucy's friend Mina, who is now living in Exeter with her husband, to inform her of Lucy's death. Here's the visual prompt. We always must show a visual prompt to our students, right? Asking students maybe even before we read some of the pages, what do they think will happen in the story, right, with the characters. Always important to intrigue your students into what will happen next. And finally, we have Mina Harker's journal for today's segment, the 24th of September. Jonathan had terrible dreams last night and hardly slept a wink. I think that the news of Lucy's death has upset him as much as it has upset me. He's been distracted and nervous ever since we returned from Budapest. I've decided that it's time to read his journal. It may be the only way that I can help him. In the evening, she says, "Oh, what a shocking, shocking story. My poor Jonathan. But did it really happen? Was he really terrorized by blood-sucking monsters? Or did he imagine it? Jonathan is afraid that he's losing his mind. My poor darling, I wish I could do something to help him. I received a letter today from Professor Van Helsing in Amsterdam. He says that he's read all the letters I sent to Lucy as well as her diary, and he wants to come here to discuss the events leading up to her death. He added that he might be able to help Jonathan as well. I sincerely hope that he can." The 25th of September. Van Helsing arrived at noon, and the servant showed him into the drawing room where I was waiting. "Mrs. Harker," he said as he took off his hat, "thank you so much for seeing me on such short notice." "It's the least that I can do," I replied. "You took such good care of poor Lucy. I'll do anything I can to help you solve the mystery of her death." Van Helsing then told me that he had read Lucy's diary and was particularly interested in the sleepwalking incident in Whitby with the pale-faced, red-eyed man, remember? "Could you tell me anything more about it?" "Of course. In fact, I can give you my journal to read if you wish." Van Helsing smiled broadly. "That would be most helpful. Would you mind if I read it now?" "No, go ahead," I replied. I left Van Helsing in the drawing room to read the journal in peace. Once he had finished, we discussed the Whitby incident at great length over lunch. "How is your husband doing? Has he recovered from his brain fever?" "Yes," I said with a sigh, "but he's still very anxious." The professor seemed like a decent and trustworthy man, so I decided that I would maybe share Jonathan's journal with him. "I want you to read it," I said. "I want you to tell me what you think, because I really don't know what to believe anymore." "Of course," said Van Helsing. I gave him a typewriter copy of the journal, and he left before Jonathan arrived. Van Helsing's journal. And this is where we end for today. The 26th of September, I read Jonathan Harker's journal, and my suspicions were confirmed. I always knew that vampires existed. Now I have proof. I have just written a letter to Mina to reassure her that her husband did not imagine the terrible things that happened to him in Transylvania. I hope this news will put both of their minds at rest. There was a disturbing article in the Westminster Gazette today, the newspaper. It said that children have been disappearing from Hampstead Heath, a park near the cemetery where Lucy was buried. The missing children have all been found with tiny wounds on their necks, and they claim that a strange, pale woman lured them away. This is a very worrying development indeed, and I must go see John Seward immediately.